What's up, Big 12 fans? Welcome in. I'm Pete Mundo. We are Heartland College Sports, where we cover the Big 12 Conference. Glad you're here, as always, as a part of the show. It was the third to last Saturday of the regular season in the Big 12 Conference. And with 2 weeks to go, the drama was much more off the court on Saturday than it was on the court. Thanks for being here. Make sure you hit that thumbs up on the YouTube video. Helps us a lot. And, of course, drop that 5-star rating and review on the podcast. And if you're not on the Heartland College Sports message boards, sign up. They're free. Click on the forums tab on the homepage and interact with fellow Big 12 fans ahead of March Madness. So the day started with College Game Day being at Houston, Iowa State. And Brett Yormark did an interview with ESPN's Reese Davis. And listen, Yormark is a great representative for this league. You guys know I think the world of Brett Yormark. That being said, I thought ESPN treated him like a bit of a fool on Saturday. It's like they totally live in this fantasy la-la world that isn't what is actually happening in the real world of college athletics. So Yormark gets up there with Reese Davis, ESPN College Game Day host. And the first question that Reese Davis asks Brett Yormark is about how the Big 12 is going to basically keep up in the arms race that is college athletics. And I'm sitting here and I'm watching this and I'm thinking to myself, as just a common sense guy who gets to talk to you multiple times a week for a living, I sit here and I think to myself, what an insulting question to ask Brett Yormark. As I put up on X over the weekend when I saw this absurd commentary, I said, basically, this is like somebody who is abusing a spouse, asking the spouse who's getting abused how they plan to stop getting beat up. That's what it was on Saturday. Now, Yormark handled it like a pro because he is a pro. But ESPN asking the Big 12 commissioner how he plans to keep up in the arms race of college athletics as ESPN actively works with the SEC to basically suppress every other conference in college sports is awfully comical. And it's awfully insulting. And I know that deep down, Brett Yormark may have felt that way. He can't do anything about it right now. There's nothing for him to do about it right now. See, the ESPN deal with the Big 12 was something that no Big 12 fan should regret because it allowed the Big 12 to cut the line in front of the Pac-12 to avoid being the last person standing at the party. But now it's time to acknowledge what's going on, and it's what we've talked about on this show really for the last few weeks since some great Big 12 games are getting buried on ESPN+, the disrespect that ESPN, the biggest TV partner, has shown this conference, and the fact that we know the SEC and the Big Ten are colluding to try to basically destroy the Big 12 and the ACC and create this, Power 2 super conference, whatever you want to call it. And I believe that ESPN is a willing participant in this game. So with that, to watch Reese Davis interview Brett Yormark and listen to this conversation go on about how you're going to keep up. Yormark's a better man than me, obviously. I would have looked at him and said, well, how about you guys stop screwing with us? And I don't mean the College Game Day crew. I mean the bosses, obviously, over at ESPN. That's what I'm referring to. So that's how the whole day started. And then the drama in the Big 12, which there isn't a lot in the conference standings right now, and we'll get to that coming up here in a little bit. But that kind of kicked off a very dramatic day that got bookended with a crazy ending between BYU and Arizona. And let's be honest. Do I think that that was a foul down the stretch on Saunders? No, I don't. Arizona should have won the game 95-94. BYU got the phantom foul call at the end and got the win. Now, this is actually good for the Big 12 because I think it basically guarantees BYU a spot in the NCAA tournament. They've had obviously a good stretch here. We all know that. I mean, they had a very good weekend last weekend, so they're in a very good place right now. they're going to make the tournament. But this basically solidified it if there was any questions. They've won 4 in a row, K-State, KU, now Arizona, throwing the game at West Virginia a couple of weeks ago. They're in. But this definitely made it so that they are absolutely in. So from a Big 12 perspective, it's good that BYU won. That being said, I didn't think that was a foul. But the drama came afterwards when Arizona fans were chanting F the Mormons. And listen, BYU is new to us in the Big 12, right? If you're an old school, one of the Angry 8 Big 12 fans, as we call ourselves, BYU is still 2 years new to us. Obviously, the Pac-12 schools are all new to us as well. It seems like when these things happen, it's mostly happening from former Pac-12 teams. The hatred for BYU is not amongst the original 8 Big 12 teams left. It's from the new schools. It's from the Pac-12 schools oftentimes. And I don't know if that's because there's more regionality, there's more rivalries where, BYU fans, Utah fans, I get that, naturally live in the same place. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, they kind of have more in common. They deal with each other more frequently. I don't know if it's that, but we've had these issues before in the last 2 years since BYU's been in the Big 12. And I feel like it's mostly come from the hatred towards BYU has mostly come from those out west. And maybe somebody can explain that as someone who's obviously more of an original Big 12 guy. But that's been interesting to me that you've seen that hatred directed at BYU, which was totally classless, totally inappropriate. And it wasn't every Arizona fan. It was a portion of them, obviously. It always is. But it was a pretty loud F the Mormons chant that was going on after that game. What the Arizona fans should have been saying is F the refs. Now, you shouldn't say F anybody, but you get the point. If you got to pick one or the other, it's the refs you should be mad at, not BYU. You don't call that. And it has got to be so obvious to call a foul in that spot with the game on the line. I didn't think that was a call that the referees should have made. That being said, they made it. Saunders makes the free throws. Obviously, the rest is history. And then you've got this absurd chant happening after the game that was just totally classless and totally uncalled for. Now, Arizona's AD did put out an apology after the game, or this morning, I guess it would have been early this morning after the game, whatever. And that's something that obviously should be noted. I want to read that to you here in case you might have missed it, just so you know that this is something that happened. It's out in the clear. VP of Director of Athletics for Arizona, writing on behalf of the University of Arizona. We apologize to BYU, their student athletes, coaches, and fans. The chant is not reflective of who we are and should not have happened. So that's all you can ask for in that spot. You can't control fans really beyond that. But all in all, that was a bookend of a very bizarre day for the Big 12. And there were some referee cameras, if you didn't see them, throughout a handful of the Big 12 games during the day. And needless to say, it would have been interesting to see the referee cam on that final play between BYU and Arizona. Because, man, oh man, I would like to see whatever that official saw along the baseline. Pete Mundo on Heartland College Sports. Make sure you hit that like button right now in the video if you're watching on YouTube, and drop us a rating and a review on the podcast as well. Helps us out a lot. So thank you very much for doing that and for being a part of the show. We're getting close to 900 ratings on Apple. So drop one. It helps a lot. And we are grateful that you guys are here as always as a part of the show. Now, some of the air got taken out of the biggest game of the day in the Big 12 on Friday night when we found out that Iowa State was going to be without 2 key players for the Houston game. And they were without Curtis Jones, their 6th man, maybe the 6th man of the year in the country, and Keyshawn Gilbert. They are and were the team's top 2 leading scorers. Now, this was a game that had a lot of hype around it. Houston was a 7.5-point favorite coming into the game. Then they became a 12.5-point favorite after that was announced on Friday. And it looked like Houston was going to run away with the game. credit to TJ Otzelberger and this team for coming back in that second half, making it a game late. And while it's not horseshoes, close wins don't really matter at all. It was still, I think, a good showing for Iowa State if you're looking at this team and saying, hey, they took number 5 Houston, I don't want to say down to the wire, but listen, we had a ball game in the last few minutes between these two teams, right? With 10 minutes left, it was a 3-point game, give or take, after a strong first 10 minutes for the Cyclones. They went on, a 10-0 run, more or less, and they got this thing down to 1 possession, and then Houston slowly started chipping back away to take the lead in that game. But all in all, Iowa State putting on that kind of a show without their top 2 scorers is a testament to that team, to that coaching staff. And Iowa State, listen, this is a team that I think deserves a 2 seed. If you factor in the fact that obviously they had to move around their lineup in the middle of the season, but of course a lot of this will depend on how healthy they are down the stretch. Joe Lunardi, in his latest bracketology on Sunday, has them as the second to last 2 seed right now. That's where he's got Iowa State. He's got Houston and Iowa State both as 2 seeds as of Sunday morning. And I think that's where they both deserve to be, assuming Iowa State doesn't fall off the wagon here the last couple of weeks of the regular season. But that was a good showing on Saturday without their top 2 leading scorers. So I'm hopeful that the Big 12 is not going to have a 1 seed, most likely, unless Houston runs the table here. I mean, they're 15-1. If they win the Big 12 tournament, I don't know how they're not a 1 seed at that point, to be honest. They should be a 1 seed. Right now, you've got 3 SEC teams in there as 1 seeds: Auburn, Alabama, and Florida. That can't continue. That can't hold on. It should not hold on. But it's going to take a big effort down the stretch from Houston, which continues to likely be the team that's going to take the Big 12 championship in the regular season. They are 15-1. They're 3 games up on Tech, and they are 3 games up in Arizona. And we've got, 4 games to play in the Big 12? So basically, if they beat Texas Tech on Big Monday, they're Big 12 champs. It may not be mathematically the case, depends on what happens to Arizona, but, I mean, Houston's basically got this thing locked down. 4 games to go, they're up 3 over Texas Tech and Arizona. If Arizona held on to beat BYU, maybe it's mildly interesting here down the stretch, but you got to look right now and say, listen, there's not a lot of juice in this Big 12 race going into the final 2 weeks. It's going to be all about what's happening on the bubble. And what's happening on the bubble right now is you've got West Virginia still with one of the last 4 byes, despite the fact that they got blasted against Texas Tech. Now, they were up early. If you watch the game, they were up early, and they looked really good. But part of that was just Tech couldn't buy a bucket. And then Texas Tech goes on a 15-3 run down late in the first half. And then they came out guns a-blazing in the second half. The second half is when Tech really took off. But they closed the first half very strong. They had a 3-point lead at halftime. And then the second half was just an absolute blowout and demolishment by the Red Raiders. So that's where that game stood. And I thought that might knock West Virginia down a peg or 2, but they went into Saturday with one of the last 4 byes, and Lunardi kept them in that spot with one of the last 4 byes on Sunday morning. But the Mountaineers, they cannot stumble with their way down the stretch here. They got TCU, BYU, Utah, and UCF left. You'd feel really good about 3-1. 4-0 would be great, but going to BYU is tough. And one thing that we're learning here, you saw this with KU and K-State last weekend. What the Big 12 is doing is they are basically sending teams out to Utah to play back-to-back games against BYU and Utah. So next week, West Virginia plays at BYU on Saturday, late game, 9 p.m. And then they turn around and they play at Utah on Tuesday. Teams have not played well staying in the Utah area for these back-to-back games against BYU and then the Utes, or vice versa, Utah and then BYU. K-State and KU flipped last weekend, right? You had KU play at Utah, you had K-State play at BYU, and then they flipped it. And they both struggled mightily. So if you're a West Virginia fan, first off, you got to beat TCU this week. I mean, no ifs, ands, or buts. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room when you go out west next week. But the Mountaineers, they're kind of stumbling down the stretch here. They've lost 3 of their last 4, and some of them have not been pretty at all. So they've got to get this thing back on track and ideally go 3-1 down the stretch to feel like they've got this thing locked up going into Kansas City for the NCAA tournament. Let's see where some of you guys are watching from. We got Peter in Milwaukee. We got Stormy in Lakeview, Iowa. Bobby's in Tulsa. Jay is in Columbus, Ohio. Bracket Cat is in Manhattan, Kansas. Where else are we at here? We got Tulsa, Norman, Stillwater, Oklahoma City. A lot of you represented here. Fort Dodge, Iowa. So we're grateful for all of you guys across Big 12 country joining us here as a part of the show on Heartland College Sports. And just right now, as you're watching live, hit that like button on YouTube as well. Or share it, of course, with a buddy or two. That helps us tremendously. So the other dramatic thing, off-court thing that came out on Saturday was Bill Self news. Now, you know by now the report that dropped on Friday. If you didn't see it, it was up on the website, that Bill Self was at least interested, may be the wrong word, but Bill Self had a conversation about the Oklahoma State job last offseason. That's his alma mater. He's from the state of Oklahoma. The report came from Barry Trammell at the Oklahoman. I'm laughing because I still like Barry. I think he does a good job, but he's no fan of ours. I'm not really sure why. Something happened. I don't know. I wrote something he didn't like about OU at some point, and he got all annoyed with us, but whatever. Either way, good reporter, knows that state like the back of his hand. So then Bill Self said on Friday during a press conference, he was like, yeah, every time Oklahoma State's got an opening, they call me up and they say, hey, what do you think? Who should we target? What does it take to win? And he's like, it was nothing. It happens all the time. Well, then on Saturday during the Kansas-Oklahoma State game, Jenny Dell of CBS Sports reports that Self actually admitted that he was asked. So Bill Self admitted to CBS Sports that he was asked this time around whether or not he would be interested in the homecoming with his alma mater, which is not something he said on Friday during his press conference. And Jenny Dell reports that Self said he slept on it for one night and then decided he was going to stay at Kansas. That is a new wrinkle to something that he did not say on Friday. So I don't really know what's true because the story's already changed, right? It's kind of like when you're dealing with a little kid. I've got 3, 6, and under. They're not quite at the point where they're like lying yet, but we all know that, many of you have dealt with this or you're dealing with this right now with your own kids. The story starts to change along the way, and you get closer and closer and closer to the truth when the story continues to develop and they tell one new piece of the story. That's what I feel like happened here at Bill Self. The story on Friday was they call all the time, nothing to see here. They just asked me about the job and who should have it. But by Saturday with CBS, they're like, oh, yeah, he was actually asked if he wanted it. He slept on it for one night. So what is the third iteration of the story? I don't know. It's not that I think Bill Self had one foot out the door, but it's just fascinating given how much this team has struggled this year that this story comes up this week with Oklahoma State coming to town as KU is playing arguably its worst stretch of basketball in the Bill Self era. That's what made it fascinating to me. So I don't know what the end result is here. I think that Bill Self is fine. I know there's a small portion of KU fans that think they're better off without Bill Self. They're complete idiots. You cannot possibly think that Bill Self is a guy who's washed up when it comes to coaching college basketball. And look at Saturday, right? Saturday was, the best KU's played in weeks. They can do that. The problem is Bill Self just may need to recalibrate how he goes about recruiting his guys. Does he just go back to the high school level, get his guys, and pay them to keep coming back versus going through the transfer portal? That'll be his decision. But I heard Rick Pitino say in an interview that he wouldn't take a 5-star high school player right now because he doesn't think you can win at a high level with the high school guys. Now, that may be true to some degree. Where I disagree with him, though, is that if you get the 5-star and then you do develop them over 2, 3, 4 years, that's where you say to yourself, you're better off with that guy than you are having somebody out of the portal who you got to kind of mold to what you do. And if you're Bill Self and you can get basically anybody you want in the country at a high school, do it that way and then retain your guys and go back to program building, which is what Bill Self is always good at. Some guys don't like the portal. Some guys aren't made for this style. And I get it. I'm not trying to be one of these like, the old days, but listen, I like the days of where you look at a roster, you follow a guy's growth and development over 2, 3, 4 years, and suddenly you're like, oh, wow, this guy's really matured. Instead, now you look at a roster on basketball and you're like, oh, gosh, there's 12 guys here and 10 of them I didn't know a year ago. Like, that will change over time, I believe. I think things will start reverting back to the way they were, but it's not going to happen overnight. So all of that to say, Bill Self is going to be fine. He's just got to kind of figure out what works for him. And he had a couple of swings and misses in the portal this year. And that's frankly part of how this is going to go. You'll have years where it may look like, hey, AJ Stores, wow, look at this guy. Oh my goodness. Can you believe what KU is getting in the portal? But if the pieces don't work, then it doesn't really matter. Oh, Rylan Griffin, this guy is going to be lights out. Well, those guys haven't really panned out. And that's gotten a lot of attention, obviously. So with that being the case, now you've just got to say every year has to be evaluated on its own. And that's not an indictment on Bill Self as a head coach, and it shouldn't be. Pete Mundo with you. Glad that you are a part of the show, and thanks so much for joining us. Hey, if you haven't yet, make sure that you go check out our forums. They are free. We're hanging out with other Big 12 fans, talking Big 12 basketball, football every single day at heartlandcollegesports.com and on the forums. And yes, many of you have asked about the merch. I got my Heartland hoodie on here. I will link to that. And also, how about this? Undefeated in hypothetical games with the old SEC sign next to it. You like that? I will put that up there as well. You got the Heartland logo on the back. All right. So this will be a great way to troll all of our friends in the SEC. You're going to want to get your hands on one of those. Oh, my gosh. Well, we hope that you guys have a great day. Go Big 12. It's getting warmer across the Midwest. And thanks to all of you for watching all over the country. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day. Go Big 12.